All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a movement that literally shattered the rules of American music. We're talking about the meteoric rise of N.W.A. This is the wild story of how 5 young guys from Compton, California, stepped into a recording studio and just completely bypassed the mainstream. They weren't chasing radio play, they definitely weren't looking for corporate approval. Instead, they were documenting their unfiltered reality. And, well, it was a reality that America wasn't exactly ready to hear, but absolutely needed to understand. So we're going to break down exactly how they forced their way from the extreme margins of society right into the dead center of American culture. Think about this massive divide for a second. On one hand, you've got politicians and the establishment labeling them as outright dangerous. Within months of their debut, they were facing intense pushback from the highest levels of authority. But on the flip side, you had millions of young people all over the world looking at those exact same 5 guys and calling them prophets. So to really get why their music provoked such intense, polarized reactions, we've got to go back and understand exactly where that music came from.
Section 1. Welcome to 1980s Compton.
So picture this. In the decades right after World War II, Compton, which sits just south of downtown LA, was actually this thriving working-class community. But by the time the 1980s rolled around, that reality was completely gone. Economic opportunities just vanished. Manufacturing jobs packed up and left the area. And into that massive socioeconomic vacuum rushed gang violence and a totally devastating drug epidemic. The kids growing up there, including the future members of N.W.A, were seeing all of this firsthand, every single day. For a lot of America, Compton was just a warning sign on the news or even a punchline. But for these guys, it was simply home. Complex, dangerous, and very, very real. Section 2. Forming Ruthless Records. Now, you've got to understand, this was absolutely not some manufactured boy band put together by a record executive fancy boardroom. No way. This was a perfect, almost chaotic collision of individual talents. You had Eazy-E, who brought the street resources and a seriously brilliant business mind. The guy just understood risk and reward. Then there's Dr. He wasn't interested in the gang life. His escape was sound. He brought the technical craft and the sonic vision. Ice Cube was academically gifted and brought this incredibly sharp, critical lyricism that perfectly captured the contradictions of their neighborhood. Add in MC Ren's super ambitious creative voice and DJ Yella's collaborative production skills, and you've got 5 distinct guys who all looked around and realized something crucial. The hip-hop coming out of New York, as amazing as it was, just didn't reflect their specific lives on the West Coast. So, in 1987, through mutual connections, Eazy-E and Dr. Dre link up. Dre's got the vision, Eazy's got the resources, and together, they form Ruthless Records. The absolute key words to remember here are independent and complete creative control. They had 0 major label backing them, none. But that actually allowed their first project, N.W.A, to be built purely on unfiltered truth. They basically refused to sanitize their stories just to make them more marketable. Section 3. Straight Outta Compton. When the album Straight Outta Compton dropped in 1988, it hit like a ton of bricks. It was aggressive, it was confrontational. The source material actually describes it perfectly as journalism set to beats. The album tackled super heavy real-world issues, stuff like police misconduct, systemic inequality, and just the daily grind of navigating an economically abandoned community. The production was heavy and the lyrics totally unapologetic. They weren't asking anyone for pity. They were demanding to be seen and heard by a society that had, frankly, written them off. 1 million. By 1989, this album was knocking on the door of 1 million copies sold. Now, to put that into perspective, the reason this matters so much is how they sold those copies. They did it with 0 major label backing, 0 mainstream radio support, and 0 retail support. It was driven purely by word of mouth, just because the music connected so deeply. Kids in completely different cities were recognizing their own struggles in those tracks. The album sold phenomenally well simply because it sounded like the truth.
Section 4. Censorship and the N.W.A.
Because they were directly challenging police authority and speaking so rawly, the backlash was fierce. Radio stations flat out banned their airplay. Major retail chains completely refused to stock the physical album. It got to the point where at a concert in Detroit, local police actually monitored the show, explicitly banned them from performing certain songs, and then literally stopped the performance when the group played them anyway. And then comes a big one. The FBI actually sent a warning letter to the group's label expressing their concern. That was a completely unprecedented intervention by federal law enforcement over a music album.
But here's the ultimate irony. The attempts to silence N.W.A. completely backfired. Think about it. When you tell millions of teenagers that something is way too dangerous for them to listen to, you've just handed them the greatest marketing tool in the world. They are going to find a way to hear it. So instead of shutting them down, this massive controversy just amplified their message, placing N.W.A. dead center in a huge national conversation about free speech, censorship, and race.
Section 5. The famous breakup. Behind the scenes, though, things were moving incredibly fast, and not always in a good way. By 1989, tensions over the business side of things reached a boiling point. Ice Cube, who was writing a huge chunk of the material, wanted fair compensation and financial transparency. When those negotiations failed, he walked away. Then, in 1991, Dr. Dre had his own disputes with the business arrangements and left to form Death Row Records. Now, these early departures are actually massive teaching moments about the harsh realities of artist compensation and ownership in the music industry. Tragically, in 1995, Eazy-E passed away from a serious illness at just 31 years old, which sadly ended any real possibility of a full reunion. Yet, despite how brief their run was, in 2016, the group was officially inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, fully cementing their place in American music history.
Section 6. A generational legacy.
When you zoom out, their enduring legacy really rests on three crucial pillars. First, they proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that if the music connects with people, independent artists absolutely can compete with the major labels. True ownership is possible. Second, they radically expanded what hip-hop could even be about. They made raw, unfiltered street testimony artistically valid and globally successful. And third, they firmly established Los Angeles and the West Coast as a whole as a massive creative epicenter. I mean, the musical lineage from Dr. Dre's production leads directly to absolute legends like Snoop Dogg, Eminem, and Kendrick Lamar. N.W.A. practically kicked the door wide open for an entire region.
So I want to leave you with this final, really provocative thought. If 5 kids from a place the world had essentially written off could force their way into the mainstream consciousness without ever once asking for permission, how did they redefine who music could actually be for? You see, their revolution wasn't just about selling millions of records. It was about proving that authenticity resonates. They proved that voices from the absolute margins can step up and captivate the center, sparking intense conversations everywhere, from suburban living rooms all the way to congressional hearings. They didn't just make music, guys. They completely changed what music could say. And the world hasn't been the same since.